Hi, and welcome to TRs Place. I'm glad you've stopped in again. Today we're going to be making this card, the first in the Sneak Peek series. I originally cased Nicol Spohr. I'll put a link to her card below. Cased means copy and share everything in the card, so I will try to be doing that. First, I created a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card front by cutting an 8 1/2 by 11 inch piece of cardstock in half, then in half again. I'll save the other half for the base of the card. To make the hexagon shapes, I embossed white on white, so it will be hard to actually see the stamping and embossing until we start to apply the ink. When heat embossing, it makes it easier to use an anti-static powder tool. After you've powdered your paper, try not to touch it, as the oils in your hands will attract the embossing powder. For this step, I went through my stamps and pulled several leafy, swirly, small twiggy stamps out. Some of them are red rubber and some photopolymer. The stamp platform I have has a lid that you can take off and flip over. One side is for the red rubber and the other for the clear stamps. So I have to stamp these in steps, doing all the rubber first. I use Versamark, which is a clear ink. Now, because I know I've touched the paper, I had to use the powder bag again before I stamped. I had to stamp several times to get a clear, good impression. Not to touch the paper at this point is a bit tricky. But now we're ready to apply the embossing powder, which is plastic and must be melted with a heat gun. When you get straight powder, just use an old paintbrush to flick it away. Sometimes just tapping it on the table or lightly blowing on it will do the job. I use a pair of tweezers to hold the paper so I don't burn my fingers. The gun gets very hot. You can tell the powder is melted when it gets shiny. Apply the ink on a little randomly and a bit splotchy, but we'll fix that in a future step. I used wild honey, mustard yellow, and I also have out antique linen. The antique linen doesn't do much for the hexagons, but I will use it on the background later. After inking up that embossed piece, I will use a hexagon stencil and trace several onto the background. Use a light hand, as you may have to erase those lines after cutting. Then next you will cut each hexagon out, and then if there are any lines remaining, do that erasing. This is my handy dandy Dyson that I got for Christmas. I had to get that stray powder and scraps up. Okay, so the hexagons need a little extra shading, The antique linen just isn't cutting it, so I reached for the wild honey. Because we embossed this paper first, it is going to resist all that ink. So grabbing a paper towel, I rub it across the pieces, making the white embossing pop. Using the other 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 that we cut earlier, I'm going to lightly use some antique linen to create a few hexagon shadows. If you're changing colors, be sure your brush is clean by just rubbing it on a paper towel. Now I'm almost ready to put this together, but as I start to put the pieces around, I realize they are not dark enough, so I reach for the Distress Vintage Photo. This pad is pretty dry, so I've put an X on it, but it's still got enough in it for jobs like this. I lightly add it to one side of the pieces. You're not going to mess it up, and if you do, it's just paper. Yes, this is going to be much better. Now off camera I have added some foam tape to 3 of the hexagons, and I start gluing them in place using barely art glitter glue. I use a clear block to put even pressure on each of the hexagons. We'll go over different glues and adhesives in another video. Now I just need to decide what to back this with. I want just 1/8 of an inch to show around the edges. Thankfully this piece is already cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. My background piece must have started out a little less than that, as I didn't need to trim it at all. Okay, we're in the home stretch. All we need to do is attach it to the card base and put a sentiment on it, and then add a little bling, of course. The sentiment was just a little too white for me, so I just took that same brush we had used earlier and the residual ink that was on it and added color around the edge. Since I had a few extra hexagons left over, I decided to put some inside. It's always nice to finish the inside somehow to carry over what you had done on the outside. Then I just turn it over and trim off any excess hexagon from the back. It's easier to see what to cut from the other side. Oh, I almost forgot. Studying my original card, I saw that I used something interesting and wanted to share it. This is a dressmaker's marking wheel. Just using a little bit of pressure, it will leave stitch marks on the paper. Try it on a piece of scrap paper first. You can use a lot of stuff around your house that you have. Just keep your mind open and think like a fork. Can you tap it into ink and then onto your project to make 4 straight lines? You'd be surprised at the things you can use that you already have in your arsenal. While I add the bling, let me thank you for stopping in. If you've enjoyed this, please at least give it a thumbs up. I'd love for you to subscribe and leave a comment. If you have hung out until now, let me say that I will randomly choose a comment, pulling a name from a bowl probably, and I will send you this card. Have a great week. I hope to see you back here soon.